I was on mute all this while. So now you can hear me?
Yeah. I was like, I cannot hear you at all. I was like, I hope it's not me.
Nice.
Step
That's such a
one.
good start.
Step
Yeah.
one. Unmute.
I was like, Lindsay, what's going on? All right.
I
So,
was like,
hello, everyone.
I
Welcome
was
to
gonna
the show.
hold up a sign that said like SOS.
Nice, nice. So, let me just, so what I was saying was, hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. And I was saying that I'm really excited to welcome Lindsay to the show. Just quick backstory. I was telling Lindsay this, but Lindsay actually hired me in one of my previous companies. And yeah, throughout my job search career, there are a few recruiters that stood out, in my job search career, and Lindsay was one of those people, right? So I was really excited to invite her, and this is going to be interesting for me because I've never really gotten to speak just frankly with somebody, quote unquote, on the other side, right? So the person who recruited me. So I'm really excited. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here.
I am very excited to be here. Thank you for
How
having me.
how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm great. Can't complain.
Yeah,
Excited to do
nice, nice.
this.
Awesome. So Lindsay, for those that don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Lindsay. I'm based out of Hoboken, New Jersey. I just say New York City. It's, New York light. So I've been, in recruiting for a little over 10 years now. Started in the agency world, was there for 5 years. Really felt that I was missing, just some key pieces of being able to have influence over, what an interview process looked like, really being able to form deeper relationships with the candidates that I was hiring. And I think really being able to be embedded in a culture of a company. I think candidates are pretty good about picking up if you're genuine in your little speech about, a company's culture, if they're excited about working there. And that's something that I really felt that I was missing in an agency. So moved in-house to a company called Industrious. Not sure if anyone's heard of it, but it's a premium co-working space. They're now global company. Was there for about 3 years, was doing everything from design and construction roles to operations roles. So was there for a little over 2.5, 3 years, and then moved to a company called BTS, where I hired Mukhtar, and that company, SaaS commercial real estate space, was there for close to 4 years. Really got to see a different side of, a different industry, commercial real estate, super interesting. Did everything there from our sales, legal, but really I think my sweet spot there was our product engineering and design roles. And now I'm currently a recruiting director at a company called Avenir, and we focus mostly on private equity and VC-backed companies.
Nice, nice, awesome.
Yep.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. So you have a pretty interesting career in the recruiting space. So just for those people that don't know, what's the difference between an agency and I guess in-house or non-agency?
Yeah. So an agency typically, you have some agencies that focus specifically on one industry. You have agencies that only do finance. You have agencies that only will do, HR, executive assistants. You have agencies that will only do C-suite level roles. But typically they're working with a bunch of different companies at one time. The company that I'm at now, we've had relationships with companies for 3+ years. We have new ones that we're bringing on. So sort of different where you get different companies all the time. You're working on different roles. In-house, specifically working for one company and recruiting just for that company. You're probably doing tons of different roles, but specifically just for that one company.
Hey there, just quickly, are you looking for a PM role? Have you been struggling in this insane, crazy job market? Well, if this sounds like you, we might be able to help you. We've helped lots of people land 100 to 300K PM roles. All you have to do is just click on the link below, answer some questions, and if we see that there's an initial fit, you will be invited to a free 30-minute call where we can further assess your job search goals and challenges. And if we see that we'll be able to help you, we would explain to you how we can do that and what the next steps will be. All right, then, back to the show. Yeah. And for me, this is a bit fascinating to me, but I guess from a recruiting standpoint, which is preferable? I mean, from a recruiter standpoint, is that like, yeah, does that make sense? Like, which is, or maybe that's not the right question. Which is more stressful?
Desirable or
Which is more stressful and which is desirable?
stressful?
Yeah.
Honestly, it really depends. I feel like a lot of agencies, the way that the compensation structure is financially could be stressful to some people. Some agencies do it just based on, if you hire a role, some are hourly, some have salaries. So from a financial, standpoint, I think agencies can be a little stressful there. As I mentioned too, I think with agencies, you don't have full influence on what the process is going to look like. You don't really have direct access to the hiring managers or C-suite. You don't have insight into what hiring plans look like to sort of be proactive. So I think all of those things could be pretty stressful. But then sort of in-house, it's stressful in the sense of depending on where the company is and what they're doing, you might have a period where you're working on 15 to 20 roles. A lot of companies also don't have their own recruiting coordinator. So you're also scheduling on top of that. As I was saying earlier in our previous conversation, I think, project management is a big part of being a recruiter. So juggling, working with the hiring managers, writing up job descriptions. Also, I was doing our operations and metrics at VTS. So I was doing all the data behind the scenes. So it's not just finding candidates and talking to them and hiring them. There's a bunch of other things typically in-house that you will also be working on at the same time.
Yeah, awesome. And this now leads me to, I think this is a nice segue to the next question. What happens behind the scenes, right? So candidates, they see a role open up. Like what happens behind the scenes before the role comes up and when after the role comes up?
Yeah. So you have to really identify, I guess, the need for that hire rate. So usually there's, a discussion about why the position is needed. So maybe an employee left, maybe an employee was promoted, and that's why the role's open. Maybe the team is growing and they need more support, or, there's a new product or initiative that just needs, additional expertise. So there's a few different reasons why, a role might be open. We also will sort of figure out with the hiring managers what, the job is itself, right? The responsibilities, really figuring out what the day-to-day tasks are going to be, what the skills are, the qualifications, the logistics of the role too. Is this role going to be hybrid, in office? Sometimes, we'll look at competitors, honestly, their roles and sort of figure out what their job description looks like, and just making sure that it's competitive in the market. We work super closely, with leadership and finance as well, in-house. Also, I would say a lot of these things, I'm going to probably just hone in on the in-house portion. But really before moving forward, we have to sort of figure out what the salary is going to look like, what the compensation package is going to look like. We'll also typically work with HR just to make sure things are fair and equitable. With that role, if there's other people at the company already in that role, making sure that compensation, is the same. We'll come up with the job description. I would say, the good hiring managers and great hiring managers that I've worked with typically write those themselves, which is really great. And obviously we work on sort of the legality of the descriptions. And then we sort of figure out where and how to post it. And so obviously career pages, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed. At our company, we had, an employee referral program, so posting it there. So it really just kind of depends on what the hiring strategy is. We also might post it only internally for a little bit if it's going to be a role that we want to give people, an opportunity to sort of throw their hat in the ring there. And then once the role is open, so there's tons of things that are happening, as I mentioned, sort of a project management, strategy. So, we're going through resumes, shortlisting candidates, depending on how many applications or the quality of resumes, we might do some sourcing on LinkedIn and reach out to passive candidates too. We'll always meet with the hiring manager to figure out what their interview team is going to look like, meet with the interview team to make sure that they're all aligned on, what's expected in the role, what questions they should be asking. We really want to make sure, again, too, that everyone's aligned on what they're looking for. You never want to have an interview panel have no idea what the job is doing, because when you get to the end of that process, they're going to be looking for different things than what the person might actually be doing. typically I would like to meet with hiring managers once a week just to figure out if there was any adjustment in job description, role responsibilities, things like that. Unfortunately, sometimes, there are delays or roadblocks just depending on budget changes, if maybe an approval changes. And yeah, sometimes the role can sit open for a few weeks or a few months, depending on that. But that's typically what's going on behind the scenes.
And how many of these are you doing? How many roles are you typically handling?
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, I think a lot of companies, especially in the tech realm, in the last few years, I've seen have these sort of ebbs and flows where we are, having a hiring surge and we're hiring 25, engineers, and we needed it within a 2-month frame. Or there's times where we're on hiring freezes and we're not really hiring at all, but that sort of gives, us as recruiters an opportunity to sort of go over and refine what our processes look like, really do some things behind the scenes, maybe work on what our career page looks like. So it really just kind of depends, I think, what the company has, going on at the time.
Yeah. I guess what would you say is the capacity? Like, maybe if there is a lot of hiring going on, how many roles is one recruiter expected to handle?
Yeah, so I think it depends. I mean, some companies have really large recruiting teams, like Meta. Any fan companies will have really large recruiting teams. At VTS, when I first started, we were a team of, I think, 12. But prior to me leaving, we were a team of only 3. So it kind of depends. I think we sort of had our own specialties, as I mentioned. I was really great at product engineering design, but also was able to flex other muscles that I had and work on finance and sales and CS roles as well. So I really just think it depends on, again, what's happening. I think for roles that you have hired for before and roles that, okay, we need 15 level 1 software engineers, we kind of keep that pipeline open. We never close it. So it just makes it easier for us. We don't have to start and stop roles. And that's why it's also really important to, talk to the finance team and talk to leadership to see what's coming down the pipeline. If they say, hey, we're going to be doing this new, product rollout in the next few months, we're going to need a certain amount of people on the team. We sort of have that in the back of our mind, just to make sure that we are keeping pipelines open and it sort of helps the company, but it, helps us as well manage those recs.
Yeah. No, the reason I was asking this is because, like, when you listed, and I'm sure you haven't even listed everything that you're doing, but it is a lot, right? People just think, why is this recruiter not getting back to me, right? So it's a lot. Like, you're actually managing several projects at the same time, behind the scenes, right? And different stakeholders, people are not always available because many people don't, like, interviewing is not necessarily a priority, so you have to sort of juggle all of that, I can imagine.
Yep.
So just quickly going to a few things now. We've heard that the job description is a wish list. Would you say that is accurate? So if you don't meet 100%, still go ahead and apply. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, so personally, my advice is to apply for, what you think you've done, what you think you can do. There are statistics that show that women and people of color, after seeing, I think it's 7 bullet points on a job resume, will typically self-select themselves out. So, when I would work with hiring managers, I would push back and make sure, is this something that they really need for this role? Is this something that, can be worked on? Is this a soft skill? Is this a hard skill? Is there anyone else in, on your team that has these certain things where maybe these certain bullet points aren't as important? Depending on the role too, I would always tell hiring managers, do they need a college education? Do they need, a certain degree? Most of the time for the roles that I was hiring for, people just sort of learn the skills on the job, unless it's maybe, a legal role or something in finance. Typically, a lot of the roles did not need degrees. So I think for me, I think if you read the job description and you think, yeah, I've done this, I can do this, there's no harm in applying.
Yeah. Okay. Lindsay, what about situations whereby people apply and then they get rejected within minutes of applying? Like, what's happening there?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things, applicant tracking systems, ATS systems, Lever, Greenhouse, some do have filtering. Personally, at the companies I've been at, we haven't used AI or any sort of, screening in that sense. We do have pre-screening questions sometimes. It might have to do with logistics of a location or compensation expectations, or, if we're doing sponsorships, for the role. So if you don't meet some of those logistical things, you might get filtered out. I think a lot of times too, it's just a qualifications mismatch. I think if the job requires a very specific skill set, or experience, and your resume doesn't have that on there, that probably is that as well. You might be overqualified too. Sometimes I think a lot of recruiters will see a resume and the job only requires 4 years of experience and someone has had 15 to 20. And, they might think, well, this person's not going to be happy doing this job. So that might be something, and then just errors in the actual resume or application. There might be grammar mistakes, typos, things like that. Things that are just like immediate rejections, I'd say. So I think those are just like a few of the things.
Yeah. And so the very quick rejection that happens like almost immediately, is that also from recruiters reading the resume, or is that mostly from the logistical questions?
Yeah. So my own personal experience, we actually didn't have anything that would immediately reject you. If a role was maybe closed at that time, like in the same moment that you're applying for it, that might have happened. A lot of times there might be roles that you're applying for that have already closed and just hasn't been taken off the website. That could happen like that. But I would say in my experience, I haven't had anything where something was immediately rejected, but it's probably the logistical part of it. Like if a role is sitting in New York City and, someone's in Alabama and they're like, this is, you have to be in office, that's an immediate no. It, depending on what you click, it might do that.
Yeah. And and I know you don't speak for all recruiters, so I'm aware of that. But do many recruiters go through all jobs that come in, or is that just impossible?
Like resumes?
Yeah, resumes. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it depends. I think we're, as recruiters, definitely seeing an uptick in applications. 3 years ago, I would hire for, certain roles that over 2 weeks would only have 20 applications. And, recently those same roles within 24 hours would have over 200. Mm-hmm. So I think recently it's just depended on the volume. Typically for me, like I said, the companies I was at, we didn't use any sort of AI or anything. It was just, my own eyeballs looking at resumes. So I think for me initially, what I would go over is the person's job title and experience, does it align with the role? Any sort of keywords or skills that I think would be important. Listen, I think, formatting and being able to actually read the resume is super important, right? Is it clear? And typically I would do a quick pass of that and sort of put candidates into a maybe pile just to, get rid of the ones that are definite no's. And then I would just do a sort of second deeper review just to go over again if there's any metrics or, quantifiable results, any accomplishments, things like that. And then obviously, relevance to the role as well. So again, can't speak for all recruiters. I personally put eyeballs on everything. I think also too, it depends with, again, the sheer number of application. I think that some of it is a numbers game. If you're having 250 resumes, to look at, and you only maybe go through 50, I might not even get to your resume at all at any point. So it's not that I rejected it. I just didn't even get to see it.
Yeah. And in that case, would it be helpful for a candidate to send you an email?
To just say, hey, I mean, it depends. It couldn't hurt. I mean, there's times I've gotten emails or LinkedIn messages of people saying, hey, just want to give you a heads up. I applied for this. And I think for the most part, it will sort of draw my attention there and I'll go and check and be like, okay, yeah, this person is a good fit. Again, for me, I err more on the side of doing a little bit more can't hurt. You know, if you have the time to do it, if you have the time to reach out, I don't think it can hurt.
Yeah. And when you look at a resume, can you walk me through like how what are you looking at first? Like how does your eye sort of scan through that resume?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, I think it really depends. I think one, obviously being able to read the actual resume. I think being able to really tell a story in your resume too, with, sort of, I would say impact driven, bullet points. So instead of just writing, I led product development for new features, really digging in a little bit and saying, I led development of a new AI powered feature. It increased user engagement by 30%. It reduced churn by 15%. I think really being able to show what you did is going to be really important for recruiters, hiring managers as well. They want to see the impact of your work. I think making it, clear, concise, not a lot of buzzwords or fluff or things like that, just sort of the relevant experience. I think any sort of leadership or career growth is, really important to any promotions that you've had. And then I think too, from like, I guess, product management role experience, even if you haven't had an actual PM role, it's something that you're interested in doing, really being able to sort of, I guess, frame your past experiences to, show that you could have experience in that, right? You were a software engineer, you're transitioning to, a PM, and sort of highlighting how you maybe worked with the PM team could be, important there too.
Yeah. One question that came in is, what would you say is the best resume format for uploading via LinkedIn or like an employer site?
Yeah. So I think for LinkedIn, I know a lot of people do sort of the easy apply for LinkedIn. And I think there's, pros and cons of using that. I think one, it obviously saves you time. You can apply to multiple jobs quickly. Obviously increases your exposure, right? Recruiters can scan through it pretty quickly too. If you're on your phone, you can do it pretty much from anywhere. But I think the things with that is a lot of it is probably just generic applications. I'd probably say you'll probably have a lower response rate as well if you're having so many people, apply to that. Probably, the companies are getting a lot of applications there. It also might not be, the best job too. I think some, maybe like better quality companies or jobs aren't using, easy apply. But I think in terms of the structure, as I said, I think tailoring it to the actual job description, reading the job description and tailoring it to that is going to be super important. Again, as I said, making sure things are clear and concise. You don't want a resume that's also 5 pages long. If you, have done things in multiple roles, maybe just, making sure that you can condense those too. And again, too, I think especially for product and design roles, I think you can add a little bit of creativity for it. If you're a lawyer applying for a job, you might not have some fun little, quirks on the resume, but I think honestly, tailor it to the role that you're applying for, right? If it's, product design role, I don't have a problem with you adding some color or things like that, really showing your personality there. It just depends on like the role that you're applying for.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because also one of the things that you hear is you should have a resume that is ATS friendly. So don't do any design. It should just be, plain text. So what are your thoughts on that? Like if somebody has this, maybe fancy Canva resume, will they get through the ATS to you?
Yeah. So it depends, right? So what we were using, it did, but I guess again, it really just depends. So I guess, you probably maybe can avoid graphics, but for the most part, the ones that we were using, it came through. I'd probably say in terms of ATS friendly, maybe just using simple headings, right? Education, skills, work experience. And then again, too, just being able to just use, I guess, keywords from what the job description has. So it sort of helps matching those skills. But, I think at the end of the day, a resume should first, stand out to a human being, not just, an ATS system.
Makes sense. Some people say don't waste your time applying, especially in this job search market. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said too, I mean, it doesn't hurt if you see a job that aligns with what you've done, if you see a company that aligns with, your values and it's interesting to you, why not? I have had tons of people that I've spoken to who have said, hey, do you think I should apply for this? And again, at the end of the day, why not? What's the harm in applying? I like to tell people too, even if they're not looking for a job, even if they're really happy where they are, if they're a passive candidate, I tell people that they should be sort of actively interviewing, just because one, it reminds you of what you've done, right? So if you are up for promotions or you have your own reviews coming up, it really reminds yourself of what you've done. I think we, in life get very few opportunities to, pat ourselves on the back and really be our own champion. So I think that's great. A lot of people who have been at companies for years and have not had to interview in a bit, might be a bit rusty. So I think just being able to always, hone in on your interviewing skills is, super important too.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a definite confidence booster. So I guess what I'm the pain point that I'm trying to touch on is a lot of people feel like when they apply, they are wasting their time. Like they're just, they never get responses, or they feel like they get automated rejection. So, and then you're seeing people saying, don't waste your time applying, just go behind the scenes, So I guess, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any opinions on that?
So, I mean, listen, I think, obviously it's an investment of your time. There are some companies that make you go through 8 rounds. They make you do a presentation, an assessment. And it kind of sometimes seems like a second and third job sometimes to do that. But, I think, again, it's really important to use those opportunities to really see what you enjoy doing. And, as much as they're interviewing you, it really is an opportunity for you to interview a company as well. I think, listen, I think sometimes recruiters, do get a bad rap sometimes, but there are ones that are very skilled and, genuinely want to, help candidates connect with companies and really get them roles. I know some of the biggest frustrations are, with recruiters ghosting, or, they reach out about a role and they disappear, or you've already gone through 4 rounds and, you haven't heard from the recruiter. So I think, that could be a little bit of a turnoff. I have spoken to people who have gone through interview processes where their recruiter had no idea, what the role actually took, the responsibilities, couldn't really answer any questions about the company. So I think, a lack of knowledge sometimes can be a turnoff too. A lot of times I know people will get messages on LinkedIn or in other places from recruiters that, you can tell are just sort of copy and paste. So I think that can be a turnoff there as well. But, I think at the end of the day, there are good recruiters, there are good processes that, companies have. So again, it really is just about finding something that's interesting to you. And even if there's something that, again, it might be, not super interesting, if you go through a process, at the end of that, you might find, a great new role that you had no idea about a company prior. So
For sure. No, definitely. And the one thing that I advise people, because the job search market is just crazy, so I usually advise them to apply early. Just to your point of, I mean, a role that was getting 20 applications before now is getting 200, right? So you just apply early, because it's all about increasing your chances. And to your point, like if you can do extra, why not? So I tell them apply early, apply to jobs where you're a good match, right? So I mean, rule of thumb, I say 75% or above. And then, apply early, maybe within 24 hours if you can. And then after you do that, reach out to the recruiter. And I find out when people do that, and then not just even reaching out, then following up, 3 businesses after, I find out when people do that, they tend to get a pretty good response rate.
Yeah. And like at the end of the day, I mean, I think, recruiters want to be your partner through the process too. I was saying earlier in our conversation that I think something that, I love the most about recruiting is that relationship building, and whether I can help someone in a role at a company that I'm at, or if I know someone who's looking, I think that's something that, is really important too.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the interview now. So let's say you find a candidate. First of all, like how many, on average, how many people are invited to a screening call? Like, is there like an average number of people that are invited?
Yeah, I think it really depends. As I said before, there's some roles where there might be 3, 4, 5, job openings within under one title. So that could be one thing. I think it really depends too what the recruiter has on their plate. If they're hiring for 15 different specific niche roles, obviously for each role, it probably might be a little bit less. And then, as I said too, a lot of in-house recruiters aren't just screening people, right? They're doing tons of other things. So it really is, I think, about what that recruiter, how they sort of structure their day. I'd say for me, on average, I probably have anywhere from 4 to 5 screens a day. So some range 30 minutes, some are 45 minutes. So that's typically where I set.
Yeah. And is this for the same role? I guess, how many people would you normally screen for one particular role?
Yeah, I think a lot of hiring managers, I'd say on average, probably want to speak to at least 5 people, 5 or 6 people, before they feel comfortable like moving anyone forward to second rounds, third rounds. But I think it really just depends. You have some hiring managers who are the ones that are like, nope, they have to check off every single box on this resume, and I'm not speaking to anyone unless they have those things. Obviously, that's where it's our job to come in and say, well, that's not really feasible. But yeah, I think it really just depends too. I mean, there's hiring managers that are doing tons of other things too. So it's really important. It was really important for my job to make sure that the hiring manager was a partner there too, and that they were invested in this role. And it wasn't just seen as, okay, we just need to fill a seat. Really important to make sure that they were invested in that and really taking the time to make the time to talk to candidates, block off times on their calendar to talk to people. So I think it really depends. I don't think there's like a specific number. Again, too, there's some roles that, again, are super, super niche. So I might only speak to 2 people that fit that exact profile. So it really, really just depends.
Yeah. Well, no, this is good because there's so much advice out there, and you hear all these things like, oh, there are usually 6 candidates, so so it's just nice to hear another perspective. Like it really depends. It depends on there's so many things that way.
Yeah, I think too. I think I mentioned earlier, but sometimes a job description might change. The need for, the team might change. They might say, hey, we actually don't need someone as senior, or hey, we do need someone a little bit more senior. So I think that also changes too. You can be in the middle of an interview process. You might already be at the end, and a company might say, hey, so sorry, we're actually doing restructuring, or we're hiring someone internally now. So there's tons of things that can happen there too.
Yeah. On interviews, what do you think most people get wrong about interviews?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things, I think giving, generic answers or vague answers, as I said, same thing on your resume, right? Just saying, well, I've worn many hats, or I love being challenged, and that's great, but you sort of need to dig in a little bit. As I mentioned too on resumes, I think quantifying things is really important. You can't just say, I built out a sales team. It's like, okay, but what did you do to do that? What did you do to, build that team out? So really being able to, dig in a little bit. I think, people either talk too little or talk too much. I've had conversations with people where you can tell they're super excited, but, after a 45-minute, call, I've maybe spoken 2 minutes and there's no room for me to ask questions. So I think being a little bit long-winded and a little bit too in-depth could hurt you a little bit. And I think too, I mean, this is really your opportunity to ask the questions that you want to ask. So I think at the end of end of an interview, asking sort of generic questions or just saying, no, I don't have anything, could be maybe hurtful to you too. It might show that you either weren't listening, don't necessarily maybe, care about the role. And in terms to, maybe not researching the company prior, I've had calls with some people who I've, called up for an interview and they have said, where are you from? Like, what is this? So I think that too. And then I think being on time and prepared goes a long way. If you're 10 to 15 minutes late for an interview, obviously things happen, but being proactive about it and saying, hey, I might be late, things like that. So just like the logistical parts too.
Yeah. Has there been something that someone did for an interview that was really unique, but it worked in their favor?
Yeah. So I did have one person who it was the end of a process. They had already gotten the offer, but they had asked me and asked the hiring manager if they could actually speak with a few people that are on the team before they accepted it. So it was almost like a reverse sort of reference check, just making sure that the team enjoyed what they were doing. They asked questions about, the hiring manager, things like that. So I think it really, demonstrated this sort of selectiveness that was super interesting. And I think it also showed that they were really intentional about joining, a company that was going to align with what they were looking for.
Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
Nice. Quite unique. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about negotiations now. So at the beginning, you mentioned, before a job comes out, there is the compensation. So is that set? Like there's a range that's set normally? All right.
Yeah. So typically, yes. I mean, when, finance teams will do budgeting for the year, each department will have a certain amount that they can use for their hiring. I know in a bunch of states, I know New York specifically, right now there's a law that you have to post the range, on a job description of what the role is. Some companies I think are a little, take a little too much leeway with that. And you can see a job that says, the minimum for this is 100,000 and it goes all the way up to 450,000. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I've seen that before and I'm just like, that's not legal. So sometimes you see that. So, we will typically work with our HR team. There are tons of different programs too, that sort of see what the median range is, for certain roles, specific seniority, locations, things like that. And then it depends on where the company wants to sit, whether they want to sit in the 90th percentile of that, the 75 percentile of that. So really just depends. I think some companies, especially ones that maybe are newer and they're more, startup, maybe Series A, a lot of them will offer more equity than they offer compensation in terms of, financially. Some companies will offer different incentives in lieu of salary, like free lunches and things like that. So it really depends on what you're looking for. But yeah, typically it is set. One company I worked at, we were very strict about salaries and there was no negotiation at all. And we sort of had to, describe it in the sense of we want to keep things fair and equitable here. This is just, if you're doing this specific role with these specific skills, this is what everyone's going to get paid. And then, I've been at companies where, they give you a range and then they can maybe go 5 to 10K more, just depending on what's in the budget.
5 to 10K above the range, above the top.
Above the range. Yeah.
Nice. So how do you advise people to answer the salary question? Like, what's your salary expectations?
Yeah. So I think, for that, I know New York too, and a bunch of other places, you cannot ask directly what you are making at your current company. And so I typically advise not to tell recruiters what you're making now. I just don't see the benefit of that. I would always tell candidates too, to redirect the conversation a bit too. And just, you can say something like, well, this is our initial conversation. I'd love to learn more, about the responsibilities and about the team. Can you give me a range? Just because, as I said, most companies do have set ranges. And so I think it's super important as a recruiter to have that conversation up front with a candidate, only because, as I said, some of these processes are pretty lengthy and you never want to get to the end of a conversation or the end of a process. And, you were expecting a lot more than they're offering. So I think it's super important to have those conversations in the beginning.
Yeah. And as a recruiter, if somebody does that technique where they redirect the question to you, how do you take it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we have a set range. Depending on the company, we either can or can't go above that. But I err on the side of just being super transparent. If they say, hey, I'm looking for 250K and I know we only have 185, we're probably not going to hit that. So I like to be super transparent and say, hey, listen, we might be able to do 5 or 10K more, but that's really it. Obviously, this is a decision that you need to make on your end. If you're comfortable with it, that's totally fine. But really sort of letting them make that decision. Sometimes too, people will say a higher number, and once you tell them the range, then they'll say it's fine for them. So it really just, I think, depends too on what a candidate's looking for and where it fits, their lifestyle.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. I know we have a few more minutes. I just want to go into some of the questions that we have. So one question from Jonathan says, do you find that JDs are too vague? When companies ask for improved KPIs, should those specifics be listed?
Yes, I do. I think obviously the same way that we want candidates to, dig in a little bit more, I think, companies should be doing the same exact thing. I think something, that I learned is really being able to make a job description read like what someone's going to be doing in a day, what they can expect doing, on a day-to-day basis, what they can expect doing in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now. And again, I think they should be using metrics, and anything too. I mean, this is really a company's opportunity to initially sell the role, sell the company, anything that is exciting that they have coming up, even maybe giving testimonials from someone, in the role in a job description can be, super helpful too. I think laying out the interview process, on job descriptions are really helpful too, just so candidates know what they can expect as next steps. But yeah, so I do think they are too vague, which also isn't helpful for, anyone applying, right? That's also, I think people might be applying and then you might have 500 job applications because the job description is too vague.
Makes sense. All right. Let's see another question. So this is from Esther. She says, how can one get hired in an international job market, specifically remotely, when you have only local experience? Like, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it really depends, right? I think a lot of companies, depending on time zones, things like that, might not be super favorable to that, depending on how much you need to be on meetings with teams that are not close to you. I think just doing research is probably step one. Seeing what specific skills you have, if there's a specific, industry that you have experience in or you're interested in, seeing what companies within that are doing that. Some companies might have legality in terms of you might not be able to work for them if you don't live there. So I think there's a few different things, but I'd probably say doing research is the number one step.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because and some companies, they specify the radius of remote, if I can say that, so is it remote US, remote Americas, remote global?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, there's some companies that even if you're remote, they just can't hire you.
Yeah, makes sense.
From a location standpoint.
Yeah. So we have 1 more minute. Lindsay, this was really lovely. I have more questions, but we have to let you go. So for people that want to keep in touch with you, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you can, or I can maybe do it in the chat, drop my LinkedIn, my messages are always open. I go through them all the time. It's, my order is Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. So I'm always, I'm always on. So feel free to shoot me a message there. Yeah. It's probably the best way.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I would drop Lindsay's LinkedIn profile in the chat after we're done. Lindsay, thank you so much. This was fun.
My God, no, this was awesome. Hopefully, y'all got some good information.
No, no, I did. Thank you all for watching. All right. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.